Hey guys, Oro here, and today I'm going to share my early first impressions on Path of Exile 2. I was fortunate enough to get invited out to LA by Grinding Gear Games, the developers, to play 8 hours of an early build of Path of Exile 2, and it was an absolutely incredible experience. Again, all the footage you're seeing is a work in progress and does not represent the final game. Path of Exile 1 is easily the greatest ARPG of all time, and the sequel is already looking to surpass it in almost every way. For those of you who don't know, I'm a huge Path of Exile fan. I've been playing since the closed beta and put over 4,000 hours into the game. I also have a unique item inside of the game, a two-handed sword called Oro's Sacrifice. Anyways, let's talk about my experience. First off, if you have played the first game, I think you're going to love the second. And if you're a new player, then Path of Exile 2 is a perfect game to start. They simplified and streamlined a lot of the overcomplicated systems for newer players, making it much easier to get into than the first game. Personally, I'm a little mixed on this, but I think overall it's for the best. Now, in my play session, I mainly played the warrior class, one of 12 classes you'll be able to choose from when the game releases. With each class comes 3 different ascendancies, which are like their own classes entirely. And in Path of Exile 2, they grant unique skills as well. In early access, there will be only 6 classes and 2 ascendancies per to start, with more coming, quote unquote, very soon. There's also only 3 acts out of the planned 6 at the moment, which means that they're adding another difficulty. So instead of going through the 6 acts planned, you'll have to go through acts 1 through 3 again at a harder difficulty. They said they wanted to focus on the end game before finishing the other acts, and I'll be going over the end game later in this video. Spoilers, it's really cool. Path of Exile 2 launches in early access December 6th, and if you want access, you'll have to buy a supporter pack, with the cheapest one being $30. You can also just wait for them to finish the game, in which case it will be free to play just like the first game. They said they're about 80% done with the rest of the content, and will be updating the game frequently, and that it'll be finished soon. This footage you're looking at is taken from the PC version of the game. Now, to talk about the gameplay itself, it feels incredible. It is much slower than Path of Exile 1, but much more methodical in the way you need to approach combat. Every single attack matters. There's also the addition of dodge rolls, which allow you to reposition very quickly, and they're on a small cooldown and give no iframes. Sorry, Dark Souls gamers. I found them near mandatory to use for most boss fights. And speaking of boss fights, the boss fights in Path of Exile 2 are next level. All of them have different attack patterns and moves that you must learn to survive. Every single boss is incredibly challenging, and you can't just portal to refill your health and flasks like you can in Path of Exile 1. Trust me, I tried. You have to go in with what you have, which means limited flasks and no escape. I feel like this makes it much more difficult than the first game, but 1,000 times more rewarding. Overcoming each boss and learning their patterns was extremely satisfying. And not only was it satisfying, it was rewarding as well. Each boss gives a huge bonus, such as a step towards a new gem slot or a passive point on the skill tree. I was told there's 30 bosses in early access, and there will be 100 when the game is finished. The quality and presentation of each boss actually blew me away. It was kept up throughout the entire 8 hours, so to me, this is the absolute best part of Path of Exile 2. Similar to the bosses, each area was a joy to explore. The graphics are incredible, the art design, sound design, the characters, the voice acting, the atmosphere, all of it were just so good. You can tell that they poured a lot of love into this game, even more than the first game, and it shows. Now I want to talk about the simplification and streamlined systems of Path of Exile 2, something I'm a little mixed on. Now, a good first example is that you no longer need to use jeweler orbs to roll for sockets or chromatic orbs for colors on your skills. Your skills are all just placed inside of a skill book, and you unlock more sockets naturally by playing through the game and defeating bosses. All the sockets in your skill book are colorless, so you can socket in whatever gems you'd like at any time. I think this is one of the best changes, because now when I find a better gear, I can just equip it right away. I don't have to worry about if I have enough currency to roll it and make it work with my specific gem setup. Now, an example of a change I don't love. Each of the 12 classes in the game focuses on one specific weapon, and that specific weapon has specific skills that can only be used with that weapon type. For example, Cyclone can now only be used with an axe. In Path of Exile 1, you can use almost any weapon with any skill, which created near infinite build variety. I'm worried that this change in Path of Exile 2 will dramatically decrease the amount of viable builds for each skill. They also removed a lot of the crafting items and added gold as a new main currency. Gold is used for almost everything from buying from vendors, gambling, and trading with other players. Crafting items now drop like candy because it's a lot harder to craft the perfect item. For example, in the later acts, I had several Exalted Orbs, an item that basically never drops in the first game. They want you to actually use the crafting items this time around and not hoard them for trading. This is another change I'm a little mixed on because I'm worried how it'll affect the economy of the game, but time will tell. Now let's talk about the legendary skill tree of this game. It's just as insane and daunting as it's always been, but it's been streamlined that each class has their suggested weapon nodes nearby their starting area, so they don't have to path around the entire skill tree unless they want specific nodes. Additionally, they've removed life percent nodes almost entirely, making it much easier for a new player to just make a build and not fuck it up. They'll actually be able to survive most content without following a build guide, so that's actually really cool. The defensive nodes now focus purely on armor, evasion, and energy shield. And speaking of defense, there's also block chance, but more than that, there's a dedicated block skill for builds of the shield that allows you to actively time your blocks and completely deflect some enemy attacks. It felt really good, but blocking too many attacks will raise your guard bar to full and give you a large stun. This is much more effective on the new WASD control scheme or on a controller, both of which I really enjoyed using, as it gave me more control over my character movement. Now, after my play session, I got to personally ask Jonathan and Chris from Grinding Gear Games some questions about the sequel. I asked about PvP, to which they said it is not a focus at all for Path of Exile 2, which is personally a bit of a bummer, but it just couldn't get right in the first game. I asked them about switching to keyboard and mouse while playing on controller for easier menu and UI navigation on PC, and they said they're working on it. I asked them if they had any plans for adding an auction house like the console version of Path of Exile 1. They said no, but they're adding in the currency exchange from the latest league in Path of Exile 1. I asked them about all of our microtransactions carrying over from the first game, which they said they're trying their best to port them all over, but not all of them will be available at day one because they're going over each and every single one and updating them for Path of Exile 2, which is really cool. They also said your stash tabs will carry over from the first game as well. I thought that was really neat. Now, I want to talk about the end game because that was the main focus of their 2-hour presentation. They said this is the main focus of Path of Exile 2 and that it was incredibly important to get right, and my god, it showed. All of the systems were incredibly in-depth, and most of them will actually be familiar to you if you played the first one. Maps are making a return in the form of randomly generated paths. We can select which map to run and modify said maps with towers in the vicinity located around the paths. It's really hard to explain. It was like a really cool, like 3D sort of visualization of the map system. But know that mapping is making a return, along with most of the endgame league mechanics from the first game, including Breach, Delirium, Expedition, and more. Now, inside of maps is where they said the hardest content and the true final boss of the game is located. They said it is going to be extremely difficult to get to and defeat. There are also 2 other endgame activities. One of them is based on Incursion, which now has an emphasis on a roguelike system, as you pick rooms and get deeper into the dungeon. Now, what I mean by roguelike is that you can actually pick between certain buffs and debuffs before you enter the next room, and it affects your entire run. And at the end of the run, it looks like things can get really, really dangerous and really psychotic, and it looks to be a lot of fun. The other endgame mechanic they sort of rushed through because the presentation is already over 2 hours, but it looked really sweet too. At the end, they showed off some really cool, unique skills tied to ascendancies. One of the skills, which was a necromancer skill, that allows you to summon a hellhound that sets everything on fire around it. And another one was tied to the sorcerer ascendancy, which allowed them to turn into a demon that drains your health faster and faster the longer you stay in the form. So that's about everything. I had the time of my life at this event, and getting to play Path of Exile 2 early was a dream come true. I think that this game has potential to surpass the first game as the greatest ARPG of all time, and I cannot wait for early access on December 6th. Thank you again so much for watching, and be sure to subscribe for more Path of Exile 2. Have a good one, guys.